difficulty in that. So, what I want, you know, the reason that I decided to give these lectures is because I get so agitated about the tendency that is everywhere at the present time to break things up into little things, to splinter everything, and to try to make everything just its own self, and not, it's a kind of deep alienation that's much more profound than mostly. It's called diversity, but what actually happens is that things are less diverse. That is, the people hold into one tiny group, or one group which is, means something or doesn't mean anything, and try never to get out of it, try never to have anything else to do with anybody beyond it, which is, it seems to me, it's based on a perfectly erroneous idea that we have nothing in common with anyone who isn't exactly like us. And that it's impossible for us to understand anyone who isn't exactly like us. It's impossible for a woman to understand a man. It's impossible for a man to understand a woman. It's impossible if you're raised in Appalachia on booze and molasses to say a word to somebody like in a piece of pig. So this is an absolute lie. It's a total absolute lie. If there's one thing that is clear, both in literature and art, it is that we find our greatest affinity to often with the people who are the least like us, rather than the most like us. And if we try to stay simply with the people who are exactly like us, it's essentially boring. And the whole history of literature and art is a history of people having perfect, extraordinary, and strange affinities with things which are as unlike them as possible. Now, I'm not just talking about people who fall in love with a goose, or who have a terrible affair with a cow, or anything of that nature. I'm talking about people in our own species who can be attracted, and mysteriously, to people that are totally wrong for them, absolutely entirely wrong for them, from anybody's guess. And they feel, instead of the wrongness, they feel this extraordinary deep affinity with that person, and a great sense of joy at the presence of the person. And they may, in fact, have a distinct feeling of lack of affinity with their own brothers and sisters. It's people that are most like them, and most have the greatest things in common with them, may seem to them absolutely alien and terrible. They may, in fact, like their dog much better than they like their mother. This has happened over and over in life, and it certainly is demonstrated in literature without any kind of necessary pathology. It isn't only people who are crazy about shoes, or what other fetish they may have, but it's just everybody that may at any time develop this extraordinary passion for totally inappropriate things, falling in fact in love. And I hope that some of you saw in the paper the other day that the dear scientists, in all their bewilderment, have decided that there is such a thing as love. You see, but this is, and they didn't decide this, you see, by looking in their own hearts. No, sir, not for a moment. No, they read a whole lot of books, and they asked a whole lot of people, and then they said, well, there seems to be something called love. And not sex, you see, not that they already decided there was such a thing as sex, but they had not decided there was such a thing as love. And they said, in fact, people taught this, I was taught this, that the idea of romantic love was a Western idea that arose in the 13th century, and in the courts of love in France and Provençal and so on. All of those, that this was a very special thing. Well, of course, then they began to read other literature, and they found that this was the commonest theme of folk songs. You already know that, Barbary Allen and so on. Folk songs and stories and everything else in China and India and Egypt and Turkey and wherever anything is written down, and it's written down about adulteress or love which is inappropriate and totally unexpected, falling on people like arrows from Cupid, you see. So that is not something that is unusual. The truth of the matter is that we have affinities with people, and we have them because I believe that because we are creatures in the body, we are incarnate beings as we live in the body. And I have really I wanted to make this as clear as I can. Now, it's, of course, a perfectly stupid truism. We all know he lives in the body. I mean, very few of you. I don't think anybody in the room imagines that he's right. At the moment, disembodied, or this is somebody else's body that he's borrowed for the evening, or anything like that. I think that we all know that we live in this kind of body. Now, before I even can say that, I have to tell you that I have another article of faith, and the reason I tell you these things is because everything I'm going to say is based on them. And the article of faith that is, first of all, I suppose really first and most important, is that everything in the world is unique. Everything in the world is unique. There is nothing duplicated, nothing. And the things which we look at and think are duplicated, like automobiles, those chairs they're sitting on, of course they're not at all. They're actually unique, each one, but you have to look at them very carefully to tell that. But it's nonetheless true. And some of them will break down, and somebody sits on them, and some of them will last forever and become part of somebody's great inheritance. But the actual chair itself is completely unique. And the cars are unique. That's why we don't lose our cars all the time in the parking lot. You can tell your car if you see, just this much of it. And of course nobody else can, because you've gotten used to its uniqueness, And it's true whether it's new or old or whatever, because it's impossible to make anything new. Now I know that every single one of you, I would bet every single one in the room heard this when you were tiny, maybe in school somewhere, that snowflakes, there was no two snowflakes. Did everybody hear that when they were little? Yes. And most people are just, I certainly did, I know most people are, so there are no two snowflakes alike. But they didn't realize it, they didn't think of the extraordinariness. The older you get, of course, the more extraordinary it seems. And then I found out only a few years ago that there are no two grains of sand which are alike. No two grains of sand that are alike. Well, that's just, it's absolutely, it's incalculable, and furthermore, it's also a great act of faith, isn't it? Because nobody's seen all of them, and nobody ever will. I mean, so all that you really can say is nobody's ever seen two grains of sand that looked alike, and then there are people who are looking. That's not like you and me. It's people who are concerned about it and looking and trying. And as for the snowflakes, who knows? I mean, not only that you can't look at each one, but also, how about the snows of yesteryear? It might be, that every 500 years exactly the same snowstorm comes through. It's exactly the same. The snow, but nobody will ever know. It's just, so we have to take an article of faith and an observation that there is no duplication. And of course, the higher you get, the more elaborate you get, there's less and less. I mean, when you get up to things like people, where each person is so unbelievably unique that it's absolutely extraordinary that we can speak to each other. It's just amazing that we can say a word to anybody else. But of course, the opposite is true. We can say a word to almost anybody else, and we can be understood by them. And this is because we live in a limited body. We are incarnate beings. We inhabit a limited body. And of course, all of you know the limits of the body, or certainly something about them. For instance, that the body can only stand a certain amount of cold, certain amount of heat, certain amount of air pressure. You can't live here and there, you can't live there. The environment has to be right for it, or it can't live. And of course, we all know how limited we are physically as a body, because we know all you have to do is take a walk with a dog, and you can see what the dog sees is absolutely invisible to us, and we could walk forever and not know that a cat walked over here and a strange dog there, and nobody, a lady in heat walked by here. All of those things that are so rich in meaning and so powerful are absolutely invisible to us, and always will be. I mean, our senses are limited. They're not only limited in the sense that we have them in these 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever you want to call them, but they are given to collapsing. Now everybody knows that if you're in a room which has, say, a very disagreeable odor in it, you first think, oh, how terrible, oh, I can't stand it. And about 10 minutes later, you don't know it. And only the people who come into the room say, oh, dear, what a terrible odor, you see, because our sense of smell is exhausted practically immediately. I mean, it has very, and I suppose this is one of the reasons that no arts have really ever developed around it, because it just doesn't, it has no staying power. So, and then of course what we see, we all know that, what we hear, we can't hear above this or below that. We just live in this very narrow thing. We live on the skin of the earth in a very narrow band, which we call our bodies. And we just inhabit them. And the body is, of course, extremely disappointing if you begin to give it too much weight, or too much attention, because you immediately become terribly aware of how limited it is. You can only get so strong, you can only get so thin, you can only get so fat, you can only get... So you see these very few things. You're never going to weigh 2,000 pounds. Even if you look at it and feel it, you aren't going to weigh it. So you're safe on that. But that's a real, genuine limit. And so we live in that kind of world. The body, of course, is wonderfully limited in what it can actually, for anybody that begins to look at it, it's a paltry thing. It really is. And if you devote yourself to it and expect it to provide you a great pleasure, for instance, well, it's very limited. It can't do it. And if you're somebody like the Marquis de Sade, you find that people really either enjoy pain or they die of it, and there you are, stuck with this dead body. So it's a terrible limitation for anybody who really turns his attention to it. And this has always been true, you see, and we're always dissatisfied with our bodies, even if we aren't paying too much attention. We always, and at the present time, of course, we have this great sense that our bodies need an awful lot of improvement and health and work, and great industries are built on our conviction that we're going to make ourselves a whole new body that's much more satisfactory. And then we have the marvelous example of Michael Jackson, whom I consider to be a great Promethean figure, because he has made himself completely old. And since that's often the dream of people, you see it, on those headlines, make yourself over. Well, he did. And this is an achievement that naturally attracts a little attention, because it has this great 20th century sense of the need to alter, to change, to destroy, and then recreate a totally different person. But it's a terrible disappointment. And when you get up to a point where you can, clean and press whatever it is, 9,000 pounds, or when you look like an adolescent girl when you start out looking entirely different, you still want to make improvements. See, it's a wonderful thing. It really never stops. So that Jackson is improving and is planning even greater extraordinary developments in his face. which is, it is, of course, a very enlightening to see it, and you can understand why. But what about us, that is, the people who live in the body, the inhabitants, really, I think we should call them, because we really just live in it, like we live in a house. And we may depart at any time. And see, the remarkable thing, and the thing which really proves to us that we are not the body, is that the body can be made to live practically forever by machines. It can just go right on, because it has only 3 absolute requirements, but they're absolute. And one of them is to sleep, and one of them is to eat, and one of them is to eliminate. And that's our bodies, and practically every other body in the world has these 3 needs. And they are not just needs. You see, they're an iron necessity. If you don't sleep, you die. If you don't eat, you die. If you don't eliminate, you die. I mean, just bingo. It's not anything mysterious about it or anything else. It simply is it, and it's true. And that is an extraordinary limitation. Now, when I say you have to eat, there's a little subtext under that you have to work, or you have to get somebody to work for you, to get the food to you. And you don't care when you make it, when you get it, you pull yams or potatoes, or you raise cattle, or you go to the supermarket with a little cart. The food does take work. To get the food takes work. Yours or somebody else's body has to do that work. So, but the eating part is absolutely necessary, and is something which you can delegate to somebody else, the work that is required to do it. And this is not true of us as the inhabitants of the body. We have 1,000 more things which are really not iron requirements like that. They're not things that we'll die of, but they're things that we both expect and want, desire and expect. And one of them, of course, is love. And another of them is ceremony and talk and affection and a whole great, wonderful, elaborate array of things, in which the center one, I believe, is the making of things. We come into the world expecting love, which is an amazing idea, But at least Poppy and at least Peony both expect to be loved when they get into the world. They look cheerful and hope that it's going to be a loving world. And of course, it doesn't matter that this is an awful lot of the time not true. It continues to be a part of our expectation. And we expect also to be able to make things. We long to make things. It's just impossible for us not to make things. We make objects, and we make invisible things, and we make useful things, and we make useless things, but we make something all the time. We plan things, and we devise things, and we imagine things, and we look for things, and collect things. We are continually, everybody in the world is continually doing that. And there's no way that you can ever stop them, and there's no way that they will ever give that up. Now, if they can really devote themselves to making something which is really valuable, then that's the happiest thing in the world for people. It's the greatest, happiest thing in the world for people. To make something, music, or paintings, or sculpture, or collections of things, or anything. But make something we will, and we have to do it. But unlike the necessities of the body, we don't die if we don't do it. We just wither. We just are diseased and withered. And there's really nothing that you can do about it. See, because the terrible thing is that the body can be maintained on machines, but the inhabitants of the body can't even be helped by the machine. There's nothing you can do if the inhabitants close up shop. There's nothing that you can do. And it's this profound difference between us, the people who inhabit these bodies, and the body itself, that's always had this mysterious, because we're dependent on it, and yet we're beyond it, the whole thing. But the thing which I want to point out to you is that this is a great limitation of us as human beings, that we have this body through which we have to work, manifest ourselves. That's the way we do it. And we manifest it constantly, what we are and who we are through our bodies. And no matter what, and no matter how, in a sense, how remote they are from us as inhabitants. And therefore, because this is true, and because the hours that it takes, the actual time that it takes to do the things which we must do, is always just as great as there is any time in life at all. And therefore, what anybody does is I think almost safe to say 90% of what we do is what everybody else is doing at the same time. That is, everybody else is sleeping, everybody else is eating, everybody else is eliminating, everybody else is making, and these experiences cannot be really terribly diverse, because we cannot be terribly remembering that we're always absolutely unique. But it's a paradox. You have to hold in your mind that this uniqueness doesn't mean that we're different from everybody else. We're only uniquely what we are. And when I say that, or when I even suggested there's no way to account for it. There's no way to measure it. There's no way to find out what you can do about it or to alter it. There's no way you can do that. It is a kind of great dark matter of the soul that our uniqueness is inviolable. So no one, in a sense, ever understands anyone. But in the opposite sense, everyone understands everyone. So you have it, and the place where you can see this, the place is in art itself. Because the idea that a culture produces things which no one else who is outside that culture can care about is completely false. We care about these things because they share our whole great human experience. And all you have to do is look at it, and you can see that this is true. I mean, it's nothing, it doesn't require any kind of great knowledge. It actually doesn't require knowledge. It only requires looking at it. And then you can see, well, this is something made by a human being, and it's very much like what I would make, and it's very much like what I am. And it's something which you can see anytime, and you can enjoy actually enormously, because it becomes the same kind of joy that you get just sitting watching people go along the street. It's one of the greatest people watching. It's one of the greatest sports. It doesn't require any costume. It doesn't require any money. You don't have to buy any equipment. You can just sit there and watch people, and it's endlessly astounding and interesting, endlessly. So to us, naturally, because it is us. And so how can we not notice it? How can we not be delighted by it? Now I want to show you some portraits or images of people, and they're from all kinds of places, absolutely no relation to each other at all. But the minute you see them, you begin to think, well, hey, that looks like so-and-so. The same thing you feel when you see people. Hey, that looks like Cousin Ella, that looks like that person that lives down the street, doesn't it? Exactly. Let's look at the slides. And it's true. You see, they do look like them. They do look like them. And now, I never saw this particular slide before a couple of days ago. And I was so struck the minute I saw it, because it looks so much like dozens of people that you see right now. It looks a little bit like the homeless, actually. Has a kind of homeless look on its face. But that's because it's an ascetic. It's homeless by choice. And it is, and who knows who it is. It's from a Afghanistan. And nobody knows, actually, of course, who made it, because almost every work of art in the world is anonymous. Concentration on who made it is a nonsense of our own time, you see, because almost, I would say easily 90% of all art is anonymous. And this is anonymous, and we just happen to know that it is an aesthetic because of where it was found. But there he is, you know a lot about him. You know that he had to sleep, he had to eat, he had to live. You know that, you see, right away. No matter what kind of fancy interpretation his inhabitant, this body's inhabitant, put on eating and then sleeping and eliminating, and put on the great questions that all of the inhabitants always ask, tremendous great questions like, where did we come from, where are we going? And so you know that he must have asked those questions. And nobody really, really all that people want is an answer. They don't care whether it makes any sense or not. They just want an answer. And I suppose one of my favorite things in the world is a story of one of the Indian tribes in Canada who believed that Crow made the world. And then Crow noticed that he couldn't see anything, so he made light. Well, he couldn't see to eat. Well, it's a wonderful idea, but it wouldn't satisfy some people at all as an explanation of why there's light. But it was satisfactory for a while, at least to great numbers of people in that tribe. You think, well, why didn't Crow make light in order to see what he was going to eat, other than just to see what he was already eating? So you have many questions, but really not any more questions than we have about the Big Bang, which satisfies most people at the present time, because you want to know, if you're a heretic, you want to know what went bang, and where did it come from? I mean, it's not the bang is the thing that banged is the original, and nobody knows what the thing that banged was, why did it bang? It's not enough to say that it's a hydrogen atom or something like that, because there are a lot of hydrogen atoms and they're not creating universes around us right now by any manner of means. And yet people cling to that, the idea of the Big Bang. So there are a lot of people now who think it didn't really happen because it doesn't fit things. And so they say the universe is made of strings. Well, that's another thing that you could either accept or not. These are very powerful fictions which are presented to make us feel as though we know something about our origins. And if we say we come from monkeys, everybody's very pleased. I had a wonderful article once by an Italian who said we aren't related to monkeys at all. Well, certainly surprised, but he said we're really descended from bears. And I've always held this as a nice alternative. In the first place, bears really look an awful lot like us. In the second place, skinned bear can hardly be told from a skinned human. If you take his head off particularly. But even then, it's not a little close. So, but the idea is nice, because bears are nice creatures and they sleep so much, they're not jumping around all the time like monkeys and swinging here and there. So it's a consoling, a quieting thought to feel that you're descended from a bear rather than a monkey. If you want to be descended from an animal, people have, all over the world always wanted to be descended from animals. They call them totem animals, but they were the creators and the things that people were descended from. So we can take bears if we get tired of monkeys, or we can take somebody else. What wonderful little story about how nice if we were only descended from cats. I don't feel that because cats are the only animal, though I love cats, that really indulge in cruelty for its own sake. Let's look at the next slide. Now this woman has been in a number of my lectures, though she died 5,000 years ago. I think we all know her. We certainly could easily know her. Even the way her hair is done, it's not that far from, it's just an immediate sense And that you know a tremendous amount about this woman. You do. You not only know that she slept and she ate the eliminator, which you know for sure, absolutely sure, but you know pretty much what was going on in her inhabitant. I mean, whoever, whatever inhabited her, whatever spirit inhabited her, and you feel almost as though you know, because you know others that look so much like her. Let's look at the next one. And there's another. See, if you saw him standing on the street, you wouldn't be surprised at all, would you? But he's really hundreds of years from us, and hundreds of miles, and from a society and from a culture that we would know absolutely nothing about, and even possibly care nothing about. But when you see this, you know there is one of us. And it's perfectly clear. You don't need to know what his cicatrice, what all of these scars on his face meant, and they meant something very important. But you don't need to know that. You don't need to know anything. You just need to see it, and you know how deeply human it is, and how completely our own. And when I talk about the universality of art, I'm not saying that this means it's wonderful or good or anything. I'm simply saying that it is demonstrably our product. It's demonstrably something which we can know and understand because it is made by human beings and we are human beings. And that this means that we have a depth of understanding and a comprehension of it that is on the human level. On our limited human level, not on some who made this and where was it made. You can learn that, and when you do, it's a pleasure. But and it is Egyptian, and it is Old Kingdom, which is a great period of Egypt. Egypt went downhill from the beginning, as almost everything does. So this portrait, which was very important, the Egyptians, everybody, they wanted portraits more than anything in the world because they believed that the soul, the inhabitant, as I call it, needed a place to inhabit. After the body had gotten exhausted, and so they made images, and hundreds of images, to be sure that there'd be a place for what they call the ka, which would be like our idea of a ghost. Let's look at the next one. And there's one of the great portraits of the world. This is a Japanese portrait, and it's of one of the princes of the time. But we know what kind of, we know what he intended to be. Whether he was it or not is another question. We know what he intended to be, which was a person of power and a person of extreme seriousness and dignity. And we know that immediately. We don't have to read a book. We only have to look. And that's the thing about the visual arts. They really are accessible to us. And whether we think they are or not doesn't make a particle difference. They are perfectly accessible to us. And this is perfect if you look at this long enough and allow yourself to feel the way it feels to have a hidden sword, to have this wonderful dark clothes with the sharpness of the clothes and the perfection of them, the whole thing. You know what that's like. You know it from yourself and from the people you know. Let's look at the next slide. And there's a mourning, a woman who was in mourning, who was grieving. And again, this is a very strongly Greek thing. Now, anybody would recognize it as Greek. And yet, it is infinitely more than that. The attitude of the body, the whole lost and dreaming, mournful face, all of these things are part of the general human experience. They're part of what we necessarily experience and share. We know when we see that. When we see someone doing like that, we know what it means. And it means the same thing here. And it always will. Let's look at, as long as we're human beings, let's look at the next slide. And then sometimes it's just a figure of such extraordinary fascination. It's exactly again like people watching. When you see somebody who bursts on the scene. It's just an astounding and fascinating and a mysterious kind of figure. And you keep coming back to it. And of course, that's true of Nefertiti. And it was much later than the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Empire. She has fascinated people ever since she's been discovered. There is nobody who looks at her, who sees her in the actuality. There's such an aura around her, as though she really had preserved her inhabitant. I mean, as though it really still was there, because it has the same kind of mystery that you can't help feeling, at least the beauty. And I think in some way every beautiful woman has something which is like Nefertiti. And is there something where there is a joining with it, and it's partly that extraordinary elegance and reserve. The sense of beauty is something which is isolated. But it's endlessly. And then the extraordinary thing, is that even in a poor reproduction, in the first place, nothing can ever be reproduced. That's an absolute law of uniqueness. And so, unless you see the original thing, you never really see it. But if the original thing has an extraordinary power, it can still filter through even a very poor reproduction. It's like the translation of poetry. If something has extraordinary poetic power, it can be a translator. It can actually be, but it will never be the same. But it can be translated, because its power is so great that it can afford to lose a lot in translation. So that something like Shakespeare, for instance, is perfectly able to move people. In fact, in German, Shakespeare in German is so powerful that many Germans have the absolute conviction that the English is a translation from the German rather than the other way around, because it seems so right and it seems so powerful. And any poem that has any kind of, has this quality, really the quality of universality that people speak about, but it's the quality of poetry. And this is the power of mystery and the power of vision that is indestructible. It's almost indestructible. So that a tiny little bust of Nefertiti, poorly painted, contains something of what she is. And of course, then when you see action, it's overwhelming. Let's look at the next slide. And this is a delightful, maybe you have never seen her before because she's not in that same order of famousness. But what a delightful creature she is. Even though her nose is somewhat obliterated, she's cheerful about it, and has a kind of charm, youthfulness that makes her seem babyish and sweet. She has done her hair so nicely. Everything, you know what went into her beingness, and not just the sculpture, but the thing itself. So that you feel as though you know her, you know a great deal, and you do know a great deal about her, simply because it is clearly, she's clearly a young and beautiful girl. Let's look at the next one. And there's another with the same kind of scars and cicatruses that mean something, but which don't need to mean anything. It's just another way in which you feel about it is a person who could be sitting next to you. And it's so, it's 900 years since this was made. So it's a very extraordinary thing. Let's look at the next. I always love her because she looks like an illustration from the 20s. She looks like a flapper, doesn't she? The little curls and the whole, and her eye makeup, she's got that old-fashioned mascara that made great, wonderful spikes out of her eyelashes. And she's very cheerful about it. We feel kind of comfortable humanness of all our funny weaknesses and all of our strengths that are always true of anybody. Let's look at the next one. Oh, there. Can you lower her just a little? just for a second, so we can see the top of her head. And she's a Greek, archaic figure, and again, it's something which you can, you just can enjoy looking at. It makes you smile to look at her. It makes you happy to look at her. And people don't really know what she was for. I mean, she's called a Rumpel's maiden, one of the chorus, but we don't need to know that. We can enjoy her marvelously for what she is, and for our sense of closeness to her as a person, as somebody that we would see. Let's look at the next slide. And this is, again, it's true of almost all works of art. We can enjoy just the body itself, the sight of the body. This is probably made, again, about 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. But there it is, and it was just made in India. And let's look at the next one. There's another body which is made in a totally different place, and it's Etruscan. It was made probably 6th century BC or something, time around that time. So those things are very far apart, and they're very unlike, but they are nonetheless absolutely engagingly human things. So that our pleasure in them is our great human pleasure of the recognition that people are marvelously the same. That there is a great bond of similarity between people, between all people at all times, in any age, in any place. And the similarities are 1,000 times greater than the differences. And it's the similarities that allow us to understand each other, and allow us to love each other, and allow us to be fond of each other, and the whole thing. And the singularities have the same power. We know that people must be unique, and so their uniqueness becomes something which is a bond, and a joy to us. Let's look at the next slide. There's a female figure, also no head or anything, but we feel what that's like to be like that, and we enjoy it, and we enjoy the beauty of the thing. We enjoy the sense of that ease with which it leans against us. The whole thing is something which we can feel as people. Let's look at the next slide. This is one of my favorites because really one of the greatest places for people watching in the world is in Roman portraits. And Roman portraits were very important to the Romans because they were important in somewhat the same way that they are for us. That is, pictures of people. They had their ceremonies when they were after they were dead, and they were taken through Rome, and it looked, the hearse was arranged so that it looked as though they were having dinner, that they were lying on a couch, drinking or eating, and they had a mask of the dead person smiling on top of this thing. So it was just like he was just going by in a parade, just going, and of course, that required that the artist had to be able to make something that looked exactly like it. So the idea of making an exact portrait was deeply required in Roman society. And it lasted all through Rome. I mean, all through, from the Republic right on through to the end of Rome. It was necessary. And people had themselves carved. It's always been my favorite thing in the world. Women had themselves carved bald. And then they would buy a different marble wig to put on. And the reason was, of course, the thing that anybody who's ever had a portrait or a photograph made of themselves, that the hair goes out of fashion. The way the hair is done goes out of fashion. And so the Romans were very fashion conscious, and so they didn't want to be caught dead with, 5-year-old hairdo. I mean, there they'd be in a beehive, and everybody else had straight hair down the middle of their back, wherever they'd be. Well, of course, we'd tell how old they were one day, and the Romans didn't have any pleasure in that, and so there they had this wonderful solution to have marble wings made. And then they always had images of their children made. And so when they went to the country, they had this whole wagon that was full of, full of little marble heads of their children and themselves in different stages. And in Rome, you could rent a pedestal in the forum and put your head on it, and you put your sculpture on it, and your name under it. They were passionate about preserving their appearance. They became absolutely expert at it. The artists became absolutely expert. Now this is Vespasian, and this is a portrait which he had made for himself. And let's look at the next one. That's the one he had to put in the forum. That was his public portrait. And he doesn't, of course, he doesn't look, he looks more like Lyndon Johnson than himself. And go back and look at his real face for a minute. You see, he doesn't look unlike him there, but he has no teeth, of course, so he has that trouble. But you know, if ever there was a sense that you're right in contact with another human being, you know so much about this because our faces tell, so much about ourselves. They can't help it, we make them. And there it is, there's Vespasian, and dead now 2,000 years. Let's go to the next. And from a world that is not really like our own, there is another face of that kind of meditating, withdrawing nature that is part of some people's entire selves. The whole sense of closing off from the world, the whole sense of the satisfaction of that innerness. Let's look at the next one. There's another very handsome bronze. And the next one. And another Egyptian. You see, we're looking just so much like a number of people, having such a sense of life, having such a sense of being a part of the human beings, and thousands of years away, thousands of meanings away, and some of those meanings actually forever unknown. And yet, what we do see and what we do know is as immediate for us and as clear to us as anything as meeting another person. Let's look at the next one. She's one of my favorite people, I see. You don't realize how many of you smile when you see her because she is just bursting with joy, isn't she? She's just so marvelous. And her great eyes popping out of her head, and her whole sense of just exuberance and youthfulness and no, there's not a touch of tragedy, not a touch of speculation or anything. She's simply wonderful. She's somebody who's just gotten a date with the person she wants, And you know that even if you didn't look like that, you felt like that. You felt just exactly this way. It's happened, here it is. And it's just a joy to see her, just a real joy. That's I know everything about her. I can hardly pass her by, but let's look at the next one. And then when you see another wonderful thing, which is a man and his wife together, and there are lots of examples of that in the history of art, and they are all accepted, wonderfully revealing. And these are two Egyptians, again, thousands of years away from us. It couldn't be later than, say, 2000 BC that they were made, so it's 4,000 years at least. But there they are, and if they came in the room, took their hands down and put on another, they wouldn't have to put on, the man wouldn't have to do anything, would he, for a nice warm day. Neither would she. You wouldn't notice, you wouldn't say, my gosh, those people have been dead 4,000 years. Or are those really people? You see, that doesn't enter your head at all. You know exactly what it is. Let's look at the next one. It's totally unlike those last two who look so similar. These people look so abundantly joyful and so delighting in each other. And here you have that marvelous, and really, I consider this one of the most instructive pieces of art. I think it should be made huge and put up in everybody's house or everybody's street or somewhere, and to say men and women are profoundly different when they love each other. And if ever that this was demonstrated, these demonstrations, you couldn't get anything more marvelously unlike in their bodies, you see. And I hope again some of you read in the paper that, again, our dear friends and scientists have discovered that women that are pear-shaped are more fertile than the women that are apple-shaped or biscuit-shaped or balloon-shaped or anything else. But the pear-shaped body, the narrower shoulders and the huge, large hips, and that's where the fertility, actually, according to these studies, is in whether women get fat in the hips or in the stomach or in the waist, and or maybe in both. But here they are, it's just with their arms around each other and as happy as can be. Let's look at the next one. There's another relation of men and women, but this is a drunken man who thinks that's an awfully attractive lady, and she thinks he's awfully attractive, and they're dancing, waltzing off together, for goodness knows, very definite purposes. Let's look at the next one. It's Salinas and Romania. Now, another thing that we all immediately know and recognize and have this curious kind of affinity with is work. And when we see people working, we know what that is like. And when we see this person's making bread, and there they are, we know what that's like. Let's look at the next one, where there's a woman making beer. And it's an attitude of working that we've all seen, we've all seen that. We've all done it, or most of us have done it at some time. So that we enter into it with the greatest of ease. We don't need to know that these were put in the tomb of all the pharaohs so they'd have servants. We just know that this is something which is a human activity and necessary, absolutely necessary, to maintain the body. Work must happen, as we say in Santa Cruz. Let's look at the next slide. And how it happens is not so important, but that it happens is absolutely necessary. And here you have somebody driving donkeys and catching birds up there with a net. And the donkeys are exactly like the donkeys that you see right now. I mean, there's no question, but they have the same kind of immediacy in being part of our lives as the people have. Let's look at the next slide. And it's that sense that here again they're driving cattle and carrying the little calf. That's true. Well, that's someplace this very moment that's happening. It's happening someplace this very moment. And not necessarily in some very remote place. It can be happening right here in Santa Cruz County, that someone is carrying in a calf or a sheep or a lamb or something that is too young to walk. And the reality of it, the way that the cattle are again, perfectly different. It's our world. Let's look at the next slide. And we don't need anything except to see it. And this is from about the 7th century B.C. This is Etruscan, a long time ago. And up until the last, maybe not even that. I was going to say up until the last 30, 50 years, you could have seen this anywhere. You could still see it in a great many places. It's again part of what we know and part of what we experience and part of what gives us its kind of seriousness, its kind of sacredness or solemnity. But it is something which is absolutely necessary. It is necessary to get this work done. It is necessary to cook these cattle because you cannot do it by yourself. Let's look at the next slide. It gives to all these things a wonderful kind of richness of our experience and our expectation and everything that we live, all of us as inhabitants live knowing. I want to show you one of the most beautiful samples because I haven't tried to make the things that you see tonight all beautiful. I want only to make them familiar. and to make them seem to you a part of what you are, a part of what the whole universe of human beings is bound to be. But I can't resist showing you this picture of this is a painting from the Song Dynasty in China, and it is of women making silk. And it is so beautiful, it's so extraordinary, the color and the arrangement of the figures, and the way that they have turned this, or that it naturally turns, his work does naturally turn into ceremony. It turns into a ceremonial act, and it gives it, and particularly when it is serious work that must be done, and that you want to have done. That this gives it a kind of grace and seriousness that is immediately perceptible. And the making of this, of the silk, see, they're pounding it in the water. Can you sharpen the focus on that a little? It really is a little sharper. Maybe just no, not that way, the other way. It becomes like some kind of a religious self. And see, work easily becomes a religion when it is serious, when it is something which has a great need, a necessity of seriousness. It's like hunting. It takes on a divine aspect. It is still human, but it takes on a divine aspect. And in some ways, this seems to be people around an altar. It isn't that. It is the women making silk and pounding it in this tub. I have some details of the figure on the right that maybe make you able to see more. Let's look at the next slide. And that brings them all together. Now the figure on the right, that's not a good slide. Next one, please. And that's the back of her head, and it's so extraordinary. That little comb in her hair, the whole, the grace of the collar, and the way that she is awfully little there of the woman, and yet we feel her whole presence. We don't see her face, we just see part of her neck and part of the side of her face, but she's there, and her clothes are so extraordinarily beautiful, the patterns on those things. Let's look at the next one, the hands. There's a detail of the collar that she's wearing. And the next one, that's a detail of her skirt. Now all of that, the whole picture has this kind of richness of details that you can't see, of course, in these things, unless you can get see them just individually, just as we are here. But there is such, not only that the work itself has been elevated to a ceremonial seriousness, a sacredness, but everything in it has had undergone the same elevation, the same, so that the beauty and the actual work that went into making her clothes, the silk that she's making, is part of this same kind of seriousness. Now, we encountered, what rare, we encountered it, but rare. Let's look at the next slide. Then, of course, all the animals that people have always made, they're exactly the same. And I hope you see that one thing that you will feel about at the end of this is this astounding permanence of the world, and permanence of the human nature and human beings, and the things that surround us. They don't change that much. They really don't change. Their interpretation may change, their attitudes may change, but they themselves are marvelously constant. Now, this is obviously a type of bull, the humpback bull, Brahma bull. It is from a civilization about which we know almost nothing. Almost nothing. We can't read that writing. We can't read that. Nobody can read that, what is written on it. We don't know what this was for. We don't know any. It was a seal, the seal thing. And we don't know really anything about it. But we do know that person who made that, looking at that animal, that Brahma bull, saw very much the same thing that we would see. And what he saw and what he imagined about it cannot be that distant from it. Let's look at the next slide. I have a whole wonderful bunch of course, you all know the Altamira things, the things which were found, which are drawings, paintings of animals. Nobody, again, knows exactly what they were for. Nobody knows how they were done, because apparently some people say that there was no light in the caves, or they had to be done by mirrors. The light had to be done by mirrors. So there was no sign that there were ways of lighting them. And yet here you have these marvelous, great rush of animals, of horses and bulls and various kinds of deer and everything. And seen with the greatest accuracy, but naturally enough, I mean, if you're hunting something, you have to be accurate with it. And if that thing is your life depends on catching that thing, if your life depends on eating it, you're going to be deadly serious about it. You're not going to turn it into a design. You're going to make it as much like the thing, particularly if you feel, as people have always felt, that if they control the image, they control the reality. It's very hard for us not to think that right now. And all I have to do is ask you to take a photograph, or a newspaper photograph, of a person that you love dearly and poke the eyes out. And I think many of you couldn't do it. And if you did do it, you'd feel terrible. And it's an act of magic, you see, in which we, somewhere in ourselves, cannot help believing. And the act of doing it would be a terrible act. A difficult and terrible act. And it is the basis of what people have always felt, that to control the image is in a way control the reality. And this bull, this bison, is something seen with great accuracy and great care. And it's what we would have seen if we'd seen them. Now let's look at these. Most of these, their animals, of course, are now extinct. Let's look at the next slide. And it's another water buffalo, looking just like a water buffalo, but from at least 2000 BC. Let's look at the next one. And the wonderful horses of the long period in China. Anybody that cares about horses, or people that don't, you see, that the mystery of the horse is that people who don't know anything about horses can be enchanted by them. It's one of their great characteristics. And for the Chinese, now when you look at this, it's just simply a joy. You think, what a beautiful horse, what a beautiful, what marvelous ornamentation, what lovely saddle and bridle he has. You don't even realize, you don't need to know how important they were in China in terms of tribute things, in terms of everybody. If you wanted to give somebody an extraordinary gift, you give them a beautiful horse. Let's look at the next one. Emperor was given a horse. And when the horses, and here's a horse with his groom, and in China at that time, every horse was given a groom when the horse was born. And the groom and the horse stayed together